Welcome to Building Better Relationships with Chuck and Barb Lewis, equipping listeners and viewers with the biblical tools to conquer the difficulties faced in this life. Chuck has practiced crisis intervention since the 1980s and has been in ministry together with his wife Barb for over 20 years. They've taken the countless lessons and the knowledge they've acquired and have put them into this life skills class to share with you. We hope this blesses you.
Well, we welcome you today to this broadcast. I'm Chuck Lewis, and this is...
I'm Barbara.
Barbara, and we're excited to be with you again today. And we're talking about resolving conflict. And this segment that we're going to be talking about to resolve conflict is through forgiveness. And a lot of unforgiveness can create a lot of problems with conflict, because forgiveness is very important. When we feel a lot of unforgiveness towards somebody, it's very hard to keep our spirit open toward that person if we've got a lot of unforgiveness toward them. So forgiveness is not a feeling, it's a choice. And Barb, do you want to read the scripture in Mark 11:25 that talks about this?
Okay. Mark 11:25 says, when you stand praying, if you have anything against someone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven will forgive you.
Yeah. So again, we forgive by an act of our will. It's not a feeling, it's an act of obedience, basically. Jesus said, when you stand praying, forgive. He didn't say one thing about when you feel like it, then do it. He just said, by the act of your will, to forgive. So it's very important that we do that, to obey the Lord, because that forgiveness, it might not change the other person, but it sets us free. And the best way to resolve conflict is to forgive them, because if I've got unforgiveness in my heart toward you, man, we can try everything in the world to resolve it, but it's not going to be resolved because of the unforgiveness that's in our hearts,
right,
toward each other.
Yeah.
So what do you do to forgive somebody that's offended you? How do you get to that point of forgiving them?
Well, I would like to share a little testimony that I have about forgiveness. I worked for a man for 30 years in an accounting practice, and he was an angry person, and he would use anger to try to get me to do what he wanted me to do. Well, anger doesn't work very well with me, because I was pretty afraid of anger, because I experienced a lot of that growing up, a lot of fighting in my house when I was a kid. And so I just got and I didn't have the tools and skills either to confront him on it at the time. Now, I did learn that as the years went on, but because I was not able to stick up for myself and tell him what he was doing that was hurting me, I stuffed a lot of anger, and I stuffed it for so long that it turned to bitterness. And I also was a timid person, so I didn't just quit that job and go someplace else. I just kept working for him, and he just treated me badly. Well, because I kept that bitterness and anger inside of me for so long, I developed TMJ, which I read in a book one time that TMJ can be caused from suppressed anger. And I remember thinking, I'm not angry. But as I read that book, the Lord wouldn't let me go on. I just laid the book down, and for 2 years, I realized what an angry person I was. And so what happened, the unforgiveness that I had for him caused me to be sick and depressed. And I remember praying with somebody that I prayed with on a regular basis, and I was just sick. I mean, I would have a sinus infection. I would take an antibiotic. I would get well. As soon as I quit taking it, I got sick again. I was sick constantly. And I remember this lady saying to me that I was praying with, she said, Barbara, the Lord shows me that this sickness you're dealing with is caused from unforgiveness. And instantly I knew it was my boss. And he had asked me to forgive him. And I had said that I would, but I didn't do it. I prayed and I wanted to forgive him, but I just remember when I was confronted with that, instantly the Lord did a work in my heart and I was able to forgive him. I do want to share, though, that during the years that I was working for him, I married Chuck, and Chuck helped me learn how to set boundaries with him. Whenever he would treat me really badly, Chuck would help me, set boundaries with him and say something to him about it. And every time I confronted him, it would get better. He would quit doing whatever it was that I confronted him on. So our relationship was getting better. But the Lord really had to do a work in my heart to enable me to forgive him. But I was willing. And I remember, I think sometimes when we don't want to forgive, we can ask God to give us the willingness to forgive.
Yes.
But like you said, we can do it as an act of our will. But I believe God, it's really forgiveness, I think, is an act of God in us. We do it in obedience to him, but he can cause the feelings to follow. So as I worked for him, our relationship got better and better. And I remember one day him saying to me, things are so much better here, and I don't know why. And I said to myself, it's because I forgave you. And because I forgave him, I had compassion. When I was unforgiving, bitterness and unforgiveness kill compassion, but forgiveness sets it free. So when I forgave him, I felt a lot of compassion for him because he'd been through a lot of terrible things in his life and he was taking them out on me. But I didn't care as long as I had so much unforgiveness. But when I forgave him, then I had compassion for him. And I know you have an amazing testimony about forgiveness because something really bad happened to you.
Well, yeah, and I really appreciate that story because I was a part of that, and I was dealing with learning how you were dealing with unforgiveness, and I had a lot of unforgiveness in my life too from my childhood that I had to deal with, and then on top of that, I was driving as a passenger in a car with some friends of mine, and we had stopped for another accident that had occurred on the highway. And as we were sitting there waiting for the accident to be cleared, a guy driving a van going 60 miles an hour came up from behind us, and he completely plowed into us, didn't even try to hit the brake because he didn't even know we were there. He was so out of it, and ran into the back of our car going 60 miles an hour, and it just crushed the back of the car in on top of us. And it was just a miracle that I lived through that accident. If I'd been sitting all the way back in the seat, I wouldn't be here right now telling the story, but because I was sitting on the edge of the back seat talking to the driver and husband and wife that was in the front, that's the only reason why I lived through it. But it really messed up my neck and my back and put me in the hospital. And so I'm laying there in the hospital and going through a lot of trauma about that. And I couldn't do anything. I didn't know when I'd get back on my feet again. I mean, all these things are going on. And if you want to hear all the details of that, you can get my book, A Broken Candle Still Gives Light. And there'll be a lot more details in there about that because Barb's always saying, I want to know all the details. I want to know everything that happened. And so anyway, you can read that book. But anyway, I heard all my life about how important it was to forgive people that have harmed us, and we need to pray for our enemies. Well, I was having a lot of feelings about that guy, and I started praying for him. All right, I started praying he'd walk out in front of trucks and fall down elevator shafts, And then I realized I don't think that's quite what God had in mind
No.
when he said to pray for people that have harmed you. But I got to the point where I could truly forgive that guy. I never met him. To this day, I never met him, but I totally forgave him. And I can honestly say that if I met him today, I could tell him that I forgave him and have no resentment in my heart toward him at all. And that was something that the Lord did for me and wants to do for all of us, to reconcile our forgiveness in our hearts to ourselves. Because forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation with the other person. I think some people
point.
are afraid
Oops, sorry.
of,
Good
of
point.
forgiveness because they think, well, if I forgive this person, I'm going to have to start developing a relationship with them, like you and your boss.
Yeah.
You were in relationship as a work relationship, but forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. I
Right.
never had any more to do with that drunk driver, but I did need to forgive him. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know if he's even alive today, but I'm free because I forgave him. So when you forgive somebody, you're setting yourself free from
Right.
that offense. It's like being handcuffed to that person if you don't forgive them, and you're taking them everywhere with you. I think for some of you, you may need to just unlock that handcuff today and be free and walk free. And you do it by the act of your will, by saying, Lord, I ask you to help me to forgive this person that has hurt me. And I choose to forgive them right now. I'm not saying what they did was okay, but I am saying that I choose to forgive them. If somebody has been incredibly harmful to you, physically, emotionally, sexually, whatever, you don't have to condone what they did and say what they did was okay.
Right.
But you're saying, I choose to forgive them so that I can walk free and I can be in a healthy relationship and live in a relationship that's thriving in my own personal life, regardless of what this other person does. I've had people say, well, when they come to and take responsibility for what they did, then I can forgive them. That'd be great if they did that. But it doesn't always work that way.
Right.
People don't always take responsibility. Your boss never took responsibility, I don't think.
Well, as I confronted him in little bits and pieces, he did.
Yeah, but he still kind of was the same person acting out the anger.
He still had a problem with anger,
a
but
lot of ways. Yeah.
I was able to start confronting it, but I was able to forgive him too.
Yeah.
As time went on, I understood more where he was coming from, what had happened to him. When we know somebody's life story, sometimes we have more compassion for them. But
yeah. So really, and if you're in a working relationship with somebody, you do have to have an ongoing relationship with them. A coworker, you might have a coworker that's just driving you bananas, and it's hard to forgive them. Again, it's by the act of your will. You can be free of that resentment. It's just choosing to do it. And it's not going to change them, but it's going to change you.
And I did want to add that a good way to get that forgiveness, to go from your head to your heart, is to pray for that person, to bless them. What the same things you would pray for yourself, pray for them. Ask the Lord to bless them, and that can help get the forgiveness to go from your head to your heart.
Yes.
Sometimes that can be a journey. But I think it's important to mention that, as you said, forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation. If you're in an abusive relationship, whether that's physically, sexually, emotionally abusive, God is not calling you to stay in a relationship like that where you're being harmed. You can forgive that person, but you don't necessarily need to reconcile with them. You draw boundaries to protect yourself. You may need to remove yourself from that situation. You don't there needs to be repentance on the other person's part where
Mhm.
they own what they did that harmed you, and then a turning away from that behavior, a changing in order for you to reconcile. And so
Yes.
just because you forgive somebody doesn't mean there aren't consequences or that you don't still have a right to protect yourself.
Right.
So I think that's important to
Very
mention.
important. And if you're in an abusive relationship right now, we want to just tell you and say this in surround sound for you to hear it, that you are way too valuable to be abused.
Mhm.
You are way too valuable to be abused sexually, emotionally, physically, in any way. And
Right.
so what do? You need to reach out for help. You
Mhm.
need to talk to a counselor or a pastor or somebody
Mhm.
around you. Let them know what's going on so that you can get some help. If you're in a dangerous situation, you need intervention. You need somebody to help you in that situation, to where you need outside help, to get out of that. So, again, if you know that you're too valuable to be treated that way, you'll act upon that, because God's never pleased with us being abused in any way, shape, or form. But I appreciate what you said, Barb, about having some physical problems while you were in the midst of that
Yeah.
conflict,
Yeah.
because it affects us physically. And you were having headaches.
Oh, to have unforgiveness in you, to be stuffing down feelings and not dealing with them. Like I said, it caused me to develop TMJ.
Yeah.
And I remember the dentist telling me, when the stress goes away, the TMJ will go away.
Mm.
Well, it lasted for 2 years. So by then it had become a habit. So it didn't go away, barring, the Lord healing it.
Mhm.
But I've seen, now that I'm better able to deal with my feelings, I've just really seen that it can, if I lay awake at night and I'm ruminating about something,
Mm.
then it needs to be talked about, because unforgiveness causes headache, stomach ache, sleeplessness. It can cause skin problems. It can cause rashes. It's amazing all the physical problems that we can suffer when we're not dealing with feelings and we're harboring resentment and unforgiveness.
Yeah, and we can have physical manifestations happening to us, and the doctors don't know where it's coming from.
Mhm.
So that lets us know that we're body, soul, and spirit.
Right.
So you're exactly right. When you forgive, you're really ministering to your own health, and you're going to sleep better at night. You're not going to have a lot of these physical problems going on. It's going to really set you free, not only emotionally, but it's going to set you free physically as well. God wants us to have the best. And he said, I have given you life, and that life more abundantly. So choose to forgive today, just by the act of your will. And you might have to forgive over and over and over. Every time that offense comes to your mind, you just go through the forgiveness process again. I choose to forgive them. I've had to forgive 100 times a day. I mean, in the Bible, they came to Jesus, said, how many times do we need to forgive? And he said 70 times 7. That's 490 times a day if we have
Which
to.
doesn't really mean that you need to forgive that many times. It means forever.
It's just forever.
You have to just
always
keep
forgive.
doing it.
Always forgive.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we encourage you to do that today by the act of your will. We'll pray that God helps you to do that and gives you the strength to make that choice to forgive. God bless you today.
If you are blessed by this ministry, please subscribe, like, and share. You can also make donations at chucklewisministries.com. Join us to keep uncovering the tools to build better relationships together. Let's do this again next week.